first time Sarah Chin heard the laughter, she thought she was losing her mind. 3 months into her night shift job as a nurse at Mercy General Hospital, she had grown used to the strange sounds that old buildings make in the darkness. The settling of floors, the whisper of air through ancient vents, the distant hum of machines keeping people alive 3 floors below. But this was different. This was the sound of children playing, their voices bright and joyful, echoing from somewhere inside the elevator shaft as she waited on the 4th floor. It was 2:47 a.m. when the elevator doors slid open with their familiar mechanical sigh. Sarah stepped inside, her soft-soled shoes making barely a sound on the worn linoleum floor. She pressed the button for the 2nd floor, where Mrs. Patterson in room 204 needed her pain medication. The elevator lurched slightly as it always did, then began its slow descent. That's when she heard it, a chorus of children's voices, giggling and laughing as if they were playing tag in a sunny playground. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, filling the small metal box with an impossible warmth that made her skin crawl. Sarah's finger hovered over the emergency stop button, her heart hammering against her ribs. The laughter continued, a symphony of pure joy that had no place in the sterile halls of a hospital at nearly 3 in the morning. She counted at least 5 distinct voices, maybe 6, all young, all delighted by some game only they could see. The elevator passed the 3rd floor, and for a moment, the laughter grew so loud she could barely think. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, silence returned. The elevator doors opened on the 2nd floor, and Sarah stepped out on shaking legs. She didn't report it that night. How could she? Who would believe that the hospital's ancient elevator had suddenly become a playground for invisible children? Instead, she finished her rounds in a daze, checking on patients who slept peacefully, unaware that something impossible was happening just down the hall. When her shift ended at 7 a.m., Sarah walked past the elevator and took the stairs instead, her footsteps echoing in the empty stairwell like a heartbeat. But the laughter didn't stop with Sarah. Within a week, other night shift workers began sharing their own encounters in hushed whispers during break times. Marcus Williams, a security guard who had worked at Mercy General for 15 years, was the first to speak up. He had been making his rounds when the elevator doors opened on the ground floor without anyone pressing the call button. The metal box stood empty, but filled with the sound of children at play. Marcus, a father of 3 himself, recognized the particular quality of that laughter, the breathless giggles that came from pure, unguarded happiness. But hearing it in the sterile silence of a hospital corridor at 3:15 a.m. made his blood run cold. "I've heard every sound this building can make," Marcus told the small group gathered in the break room during their midnight meal break. His hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold, his dark eyes reflecting the fluorescent lights above. 15 years of walking these halls, and I know the difference between pipes settling and something that shouldn't be there. This wasn't normal. This was kids playing, clear as day, coming from an empty elevator. Dr. Rebecca Martinez, who had been covering the night shift in the emergency department for the past year, leaned forward in her plastic chair. She was a small woman with tired eyes and graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, but there was nothing tired about the way she listened to Marcus's story. "You heard it too?" she asked quietly. "Between which floors?" "3rd and 4th, mostly," Marcus replied, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Sometimes when the elevator stops there by itself, and it does that a lot lately, I can hear them through the shaft. Like they're playing hide and seek in there." Dr. Martinez nodded slowly. She had been reluctant to share her own experience, afraid her colleagues would question her fitness for duty. But 3 nights earlier, she had been called to the 4th floor to consult on a patient transfer. The elevator ride up had been normal, but on the way down, somewhere between the 4th and 3rd floors, the small metal space had filled with the sound of children's laughter. Not one child, but many, a whole group of them, their voices overlapping in a joyful cacophony that made no sense in the context of where she was. "I thought I was having auditory hallucinations," she admitted, her voice barely audible over the hum of the break room's ancient refrigerator. "Sleep deprivation can cause them. But it was so clear, so real. I could almost see them, you know? Playing some game where they were all winners. Janet Rodriguez, a night shift cleaner who had been quietly eating her sandwich in the corner, suddenly looked up. Janet was in her 50s, a woman who had raised 6 children of her own and now helped raise her grandchildren during the day before coming to work at the hospital each night. She knew the sound of children better than most, and she had been carrying a secret for almost 2 weeks. "It's not just the elevator," Janet said, her accent thick with the weight of her Puerto Rican heritage and something else, fear, maybe, or sadness. "I've heard them in the walls too. When I'm cleaning the 4th floor, near the morgue, I hear them laughing and playing like they're having the best time of their lives. But there's something else." She paused, looking around the group with eyes that had seen too much. "Sometimes I hear them crying too. Not scared crying, but the kind of crying kids do when they have to leave the playground and go home." The group fell silent. The 4th floor of Mercy General Hospital housed the morgue, the hospital's record storage, and a few administrative offices that were never used during night hours. It was the quietest floor in the building, a place where the living rarely ventured after sunset. The idea that it might be filled with the sounds of playing children was disturbing enough, but Janet's addition of crying voices added a layer of tragedy that none of them wanted to explore. Over the following weeks, the reports multiplied. Thomas Park, a young resident doing his rotation in internal medicine, reported that the elevator had stopped on the 4th floor during his ride down to the cafeteria. The doors had opened to reveal an empty hallway, but the sound of children's laughter had poured in like water through a broken dam. He described it as the happiest sound I've ever heard in the saddest place possible. Maria Santos, a night shift technician in the lab, began taking the stairs exclusively after an encounter that left her shaking for hours. She had been alone in the elevator, heading down to the basement level where the lab was located, when the laughter began. But this time, she heard something else, whispers. Child voices whispering her name, over and over, like they were trying to get her attention. When she looked up at the elevator's security camera, she swore she could see small handprints on the lens, as if invisible children were pressing their faces against it to peer out at her. The hospital's maintenance department was called in repeatedly. Jim Kowalski, the head of maintenance, was a practical man who had worked in hospitals for over 20 years. He had seen every kind of mechanical failure, every type of electrical problem that could plague an aging building. But when he opened up the elevator's control panel and audio system, he found nothing that could explain the sounds. The elevator had no built-in audio system beyond a simple emergency phone and alarm. There were no speakers, no hidden devices, no technical explanation for how the laughter could be playing. "I've torn that elevator apart 3 times, Jim told the hospital administrator during a meeting that had been called to address the growing concerns among night staff. "Every wire, every circuit, every component. There's nothing there that could produce sound like that. The acoustic properties of the shaft don't explain it either. Sound doesn't just appear out of nowhere." But appear it did, night after night, always between the 3rd and 4th floors, always the sound of multiple children at play. The laughter was never menacing, never threatening. Instead, it carried a quality that made the listeners feel both comforted and deeply unsettled, as if they were eavesdropping on a moment of perfect happiness that belonged to another world entirely. Sarah Chin, who had been the first to report the phenomenon, found herself drawn back to the elevator despite her initial fear. There was something about the children's voices that tugged at her heart. As a pediatric nurse before transferring to adult care, she had spent years listening to children's laughter in hospital settings, but it was usually forced, brittle, the kind of laughter that children produce when they're trying to be brave for their parents and doctors. This laughter was different, pure, uninhibited, free from any shadow of pain or fear. One night, 3 weeks after her first encounter, Sarah decided to stay in the elevator when the laughter began. Instead of pressing the emergency stop button or rushing to get out, she stood perfectly still and listened. The voices seemed to circle around her, a playground game of tag or maybe hide and seek. She could almost feel small bodies brushing past her, could almost sense the movement of children who weren't there. "Hello," she whispered into the metal space, feeling foolish but compelled to try. "Are you playing a game?" The laughter stopped instantly, replaced by a silence so complete that Sarah could hear her own heartbeat. Then, so quietly she almost missed it, came a single word in a child's voice: yes. The elevator reached the second floor, and the doors opened with their familiar mechanical sigh. Sarah stepped out on legs that felt like water, her mind reeling with the impossibility of what had just happened. She had spoken to them. They had answered. Whatever was happening in the elevator at Mercy General Hospital, it wasn't just a mechanical malfunction or the product of overworked minds. It was something else entirely, something that defied every rational explanation she could construct. Word of Sarah's interaction spread through the night shift staff like wildfire. Some were terrified, convinced that acknowledging the voices would only make things worse. Others were curious, drawn by the same inexplicable pull that had led Sarah to speak to the invisible children. Dr. Martinez began carrying a small digital recorder during her shifts, hoping to capture evidence of the phenomenon. Marcus increased his security rounds on the fourth floor, though he couldn't say exactly what he was looking for or protecting against. The children's laughter continued, night after night, becoming as much a part of the hospital's rhythm as the beeping of heart monitors and the whisper of ventilators. But gradually, the staff began to notice patterns. The laughter was loudest on nights when the hospital was particularly quiet, when fewer emergencies brought chaos to the halls. It seemed to respond to kindness when staff members spoke gently to the voices. As Sarah had done, the laughter would soften, becoming almost musical. But when people expressed fear or anger about the phenomenon, the sounds would stop entirely, leaving behind a silence that felt somehow disappointed. Janet Rodriguez, who cleaned the fourth floor each night, began leaving small toys in the corner near the elevator, nothing expensive, just little figures and balls she picked up at the dollar store. She never told anyone about this ritual, but each morning the toys would be moved, arranged in small circles as if children had been playing with them during the night. When she mentioned this to her daughter during one of their morning phone calls, her daughter, a devout Catholic who attended Mass daily, suggested that Janet might be dealing with the spirits of children who had died in the hospital. "Maybe they're stuck, Mama," her daughter said gently. "Maybe they don't know how to leave, so they're just playing while they wait for someone to help them find their way home." The idea haunted Janet more than the laughter itself. Mercy General Hospital was over 60 years old, built in the 1960s when medical technology was far less advanced than it was today. How many children had died within these walls over the decades? How many small souls might have become lost in the transition between life and whatever came after? She began researching the hospital's history during her days off, spending hours in the local library going through old newspapers and city records. What she found broke her heart. In the 1970s and 1980s, before modern pediatric intensive care units existed, Mercy General had treated many critically ill children. The mortality rate had been heartbreakingly high, particularly during flu outbreaks in the early years of the AIDS epidemic when treatment options were limited. But it was a newspaper article from 1983 that made Janet's hands shake as she read it. A fire in a nearby apartment building had brought 17 children to Mercy General's emergency department, all suffering from severe smoke inhalation. Despite the heroic efforts of the medical staff, 6 of the children had died, all between the ages of 4 and 9, all on the same night, all treated on the 4th floor in what was then the hospital's pediatric intensive care unit. The article included their names and ages: Timothy Chin, 4, Maria Rodriguez, 5, David Park, 6, Sarah Williams, 7, Michael Santos, 8, and Jennifer Kowalski, 9. Janet stared at the names, her heart racing as she realized that several of them matched the surnames of current hospital staff. Sarah Chin shared a last name with Timothy. Maria Santos in the lab shared hers with Michael. Dr. Park in the resident program, Marcus Williams the security guard, Jennifer in human resources who worked day shifts, all of them connected by more than. That night, Janet arrived at work with a heavy heart and a head full of questions she didn't know how to ask. She went about her cleaning duties on the first 3 floors with mechanical efficiency, but when it came time to clean the 4th floor, she found herself standing in front of the elevator with tears in her eyes. "I know who you are," she whispered to the closed doors. "I know your names." The elevator doors opened immediately, though she hadn't pressed the call button. The small space was filled with the gentlest laughter she had ever heard, soft and welcoming, like children greeting a beloved grandmother. Janet stepped inside and pressed the button for the 4th floor, her hands trembling slightly. As the elevator rose, the laughter grew more distinct. She could hear individual voices now, not just a chorus but separate children, each with their own unique giggle. When the doors opened on the 4th floor, the laughter spilled out into the hallway, filling the sterile space with warmth and life. "Timothy?" Janet called softly as she began her cleaning routine. "Maria? David, Sarah, Michael, Jennifer? Are you all here?" The response was immediate, a burst of excited laughter, as if the children were thrilled to finally be acknowledged by name. As Janet worked, she found herself talking to them, telling them about her own children and grandchildren, sharing stories of playground games and birthday parties. The laughter followed her from room to room, a gentle accompaniment to her work that made the lonely night shift feel less isolated. Other staff members began to notice the change in Janet. She seemed lighter somehow, less burdened by the sadness that had always clung to her like a shadow. When they asked her about it, she would just smile and say that she had made some new friends at work. The phenomenon continued, but it evolved. Staff members who worked with children, pediatric nurses who came in for overtime shifts, residents who had worked in children's hospitals, even volunteers who read to young patients during the day, reported that the laughter was particularly responsive to them. It was as if the invisible children could sense kindness and experience with their age group. Dr. Martinez, who had been documenting the experiences, began to develop a theory. As a woman of science, she struggled with the supernatural implications of what was happening, but she couldn't deny the evidence of her own senses. Her recordings captured the laughter clearly, ruling out shared hallucinations or psychological suggestion. The consistent location between the 3rd and 4th floors, the connection to the former pediatric intensive care unit, the way the voices responded to kindness and recognition, it all pointed to something that medical school had never prepared her to understand. What if, she proposed during one of their informal break room meetings, consciousness doesn't just disappear when the body dies? What if, especially in cases of sudden or traumatic death, some part of awareness remains? Children who died here, in this building, might be experiencing a form of existence that we don't understand, but that doesn't make it less real. The idea was both comforting and terrifying. If the children were somehow still present, still playing and laughing, then death might not be the absolute ending that everyone feared. But it also raised questions about why they were trapped, why they couldn't move on to whatever peace awaited them. Sarah Chen, whose surname connected her to young Timothy, began spending extra time near the elevator during her breaks. She would sit in the hallway and listen to the laughter, sometimes speaking softly to the voices, telling them about her day or sharing memories of her own childhood. The response was always gentle, always welcoming, as if the children were grateful for the company. One night, as she sat in her usual spot with her back against the wall, Sarah heard something different. Mixed in with the familiar laughter was the sound of crying, not the distressed wailing of a hurt child, but the quiet, tired crying of someone who was homesick. Her heart broke at the sound. "Are you sad?" she asked gently. "Do you want to go home?" The crying stopped, replaced by a whisper so soft she almost missed it. "We don't know how." The words hung in the air like a prayer, and Sarah felt tears sliding down her own cheeks. These children, whether they were spirits, memories, or something else entirely, were lost. They had been playing in the hospital for 40 years, filling the nights with their laughter, but they didn't know how to leave. They were waiting for someone to show them the way home. Sarah made a decision that night, one that would change everything for the night shift staff at Mercy General Hospital. She was going to help them find their way home, whatever that meant, whatever it took. The children deserved peace, and the staff deserved to understand what had been sharing their workplace for so many years. The laughter continued, night after night, but now it carried a note of hope. The invisible children of Mercy General Hospital had finally been heard, finally been acknowledged by name, and finally found adults who cared enough to help them find their way to whatever playground waited beyond the walls of the hospital where they had died so long ago. Their joyful voices echoed through the elevator shaft, a reminder that love and kindness could transcend even death itself.